As far as I know, every single senator says we must never allow Iran to acquire a nuclear facility and a weapon. And now
Yeah.
I think we all agree on that. Why can't you just acknowledge, hey, that's really happened now? Then now they can't acquire those anymore. Why can't we just acknowledge that was a good thing and that the world's better now and more safe after what's happened? So as if that requires me as a Democrat to just condemn those kinds of things, I think we've all been saying that we want to make sure that they can never make Iranian a nuclear power.
Senator Fetterman on with Fox News talking about essentially the powers that the president has to do what he did in Iran this past weekend. And we know that there's a war powers vote today and tomorrow. We want to go to the expert who can give us the details on what's going to happen, why it needs to happen, and maybe how it might go. Chad Pergram joins us once again, senior congressional correspondent for Fox News on X at Chad Pergram, a must follow with all the news going on. Welcome back to the show, Chad. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Can you give us the setup, the schedule here for this war powers vote? What is a war powers vote, first and foremost?
Well, war powers is where Congress asserts its power to declare war. It says in Article 1, Section 8 that it is up to Congress to declare war. And what happened, and you started to have this in the post-World War II period, where you found the United States getting involved in conflicts and not declaring war. We've only done that about 10, 11 times, and the last one was against Romania in World War II. The history on this, without getting too deep into the weeds, was there was a situation in Asia in the 60s called the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And so Congress passed something called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which was basically the authorization to commit military troops in what became the Vietnam War. So you've had authorizations approved like this, certainly after 9/11, certainly for the first Gulf War to go into Iraq the second time. We call these AUMFs, authorizations for use of military force. But what happened, and the reason I come back to the Gulf of Tonkin incident, is because Congress thought that there had been mission creep, and the idea that it didn't really have control over what was going on when the executive branch was executing, its war powers. Again, the president is commander in chief. There's tension in the Constitution if you look at the powers extended to the president and what I just cited for the legislative branch. And so you had a war powers resolution, which presidents of both parties since then have all said that they don't think it's constitutional necessarily, but they kind of sort of comport with it, for lack of a better term. And they have to notify the Congress within 48 hours of sending troops into harm's way, and then you have 60 to 90 days to withdraw them or continue to notify Congress what you're doing. And you would be surprised. Sometime I'm sitting here in my office at the Capitol, and I would be stunned at how many little, there would be some notice from the White House come up and about troops we have or some operation somewhere that you haven't even heard of. It goes on all the time. And so, that's where it originates from. But so this vote today, if it were to pass, would say basically, you can't have troops overseas. You have to end the hostilities right now. The problem for those supporting it is that it is subject to a veto. You have to have both the House and Senate, pass it, and they certainly don't have the votes to override a veto.
Oh, that's an interesting addition that I hadn't really considered. Chad Pergram speaking with us right now. So the Senate votes today, and the House votes tomorrow. And I guess what I hear you saying is they'd have to have a veto-proof majority in order for President Trump to not be able to say, veto, we're not doing that.
Yeah, that's part of it. And really the most effective way to cut off a war ex post facto is the ultimate power that Congress wields, and that's controlling the purse strings. You certainly had this in 2006 when Democrats got control of the Congress and the public had kind of soured on the Iraq war. And so Nancy Pelosi became the speaker, and one of the things that Democrats and Pelosi campaigned on is that they were going to draw down the war in Iraq. And I use that phrase specifically, draw it down, because they knew they just couldn't yank the money right away. And then you have people in theater and operations in theater, and you leave everybody in the lurch. And so it took them a couple of years to do this drawdown, which took a period of time to do that. She said, we're doing this responsibly. And so, I think it would be a very interesting situation if, just to reel back the clock a couple of weeks ago and say we were still in the middle of a government shutdown, a partial government shutdown, because they did not fund the Pentagon. And they would have said, Democrats and others saying, wait a minute, this changes the equation. We're not going to run the Pentagon on this because, we disapprove of the war. And that's where, when you get into the spending cycle this fall for the Pentagon, that's going to be interesting to watch. I literally just talked to a couple of senators, including Todd Young, a Republican from Indiana, who they signaled that, we think there's going to be what we call a supplemental spending request to restock the military after this. Now, how much that will be, we don't know. What they'll need, we don't know. I will say what has passed as prologue, that, the budget and budget deficits were pretty good in the late 1990s going into 2000.
Okay.
And then 9/11 happened. And that's when they started to pass supplemental bill after supplemental bill. In other words, you have 12 annual spending bills, and then you're passing a 13th or a 14th. And sometimes these things were hundreds of billions of dollars or trillions of dollars. And guess what? Guess what that does to the deficit?
Yeah.
Bingo.
Where we are right now. Certainly. Chad Pergram speaking with us right now, the senior congressional correspondent for Fox News. I know I only have you for a couple more minutes, but I want to know about the DHS funding, because we've got warnings for potential sleeper cell activity here on the home front. People are flying. TSA, as I understand it, still is working without a paycheck. What's at stake right now? And is there any possibility that the Democrats will move a little bit to get this final part funded?
We've not seen any indication that meter has moved.
Wow.
I think that's remarkable, frankly. Democrats are saying, we still have not seen any changes. That's why there is going to be a vote in the House tomorrow on funding the Department of Homeland Security. And there's some politics that's going on here on both sides of the aisle as it pertains to this. Democrats say, okay, they think it is good politics to hold out, at least as it pertains to what's going on with ICE. But they're going to get the Democrats on the record in this vote tomorrow. And God forbid if there is some sort of terrorist attack, they can turn that around and boomerang that around on the Democrats and say, you guys are responsible for this. By the same token, let's look at the war powers votes today in the Senate and the House. If the war starts to go south, and there is almost no way that the war in Iran does not have some impact on the midterm elections, Democrats might be able to use that against Republicans and say, you guys are on the wrong side of this. You voted to continue this war. This is something this president campaigned against, and you gave him a pass, and we're going to hold you to that.
Ugh. One of these sides is going to evade good policy for better politics, and it's going to be sad. Chad Pergram, last question before we let you go. A lot of people wanting to see the SAVE Act be passed. It seems as though there are some holdouts in the Senate, people who might have supported it, but not necessarily the process of the standing filibuster or removing the filibuster. What's the latest you know about that? Dead in the water?
How long is your show?
I'm on Chad. I'll let you talk until you're done talking. I was told 30, but you go.
Because we could do an entire show on this. Here is the thing you need to watch for. You are absolutely right that there is a majority support, or right at the edge of it, among Republicans in the Senate who are for the SAVE Act. That would require the proof of citizenship to vote. Now, you have the idea in the Senate that you can't put that on the floor because you have to get past a filibuster, 60 votes. So John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, has said there's no appetite to change the filibuster rule in the Senate. There's no appetite to change it specifically for this issue. They think that goes down a slippery slope. Senators of both parties, hold that prerogative dearly to filibuster because they don't know when their ox is being gored and they need to use that. So that's why there is a reluctance. So you've had conservative senators like Ted Cruz, like Mike Lee of Utah, and say, okay, let's just not have them, filibuster in the shadows. Let's make them come out and speak on the floor. Okay. And according to the rules is that you can only speak twice per day. And eventually what you would do is you would run out of exhaustion and you have to have a vote. Okay. There are some nuances to that. And I'm going to take your audience down in the weeds. And there are about 4 people on the planet who will have heard what I'm going to explain now.
Let's go. Chad Pergram. Take us there.
So here's the key. You keep hearing this business that they can only speak twice a day. Not true. You can only speak twice a day per question on the floor. So in other words, is it the motion to proceed? Is there suddenly an amendment in play? There's something in the Senate called an amendment tree, which you can have, imagine the bill as being the trunk of the tree, and then you have a branch, that's amendment number 1, and then you have a second amendment to that, that's a sprig. So you could speak twice on each of those, plus the trunk. So that's 6 speeches per senator per question on the floor. Okay, that's the first thing. Now, here's the other thing. The term that you have not heard yet about, I've been seeing ads running against this and trying to explain some of this, and what is being left out is the question about how long a legislative day is. At the end of each Senate session, the Senate usually adjourns. It does not recess. If the Senate were to extend the legislative day, not a calendar day, but in other words, where Tuesday becomes Wednesday, and now Wednesday becomes Thursday. Okay, those are days of the week. But let's say we're in Wednesday right now. If the Senate were to recess, the legislative day of Wednesday continues tomorrow, and then it could potentially continue to Friday if you're recessing and not adjourning. That's a very important parliamentary distinction.
Do the Democrats have any control over that? Is the majority the one who controls that?
It is up to the majority. You could also object. You could even have Mike Lee or somebody potentially object to this. What I'm telling you is the idea that the Senate is adjourning and not extending this legislative day because that dictates how long you can speak and all that type of thing. The onus on that is mostly on the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune.
Who doesn't seem to be doing cartwheels over the idea of getting into this.
And again, in his defense, he's got to manage a lot of other issues. You might have, if you go down this rabbit hole of trying to deal with the SAVE Act, you are going to gum up the floor for weeks and months and not do a single nomination, another bill, anything on Iran, not a supplemental bill. You're just focused on that one issue. Now, to be fair, there are some conservatives who think it's worth that. But that would take up every cubic centimeter of floor time in the Senate morning, noon, and night, 24/7.
If the SAVE Act, if this process would have already been engaged in, and all of a sudden this Iran thing happens, and they need to vote on this War Powers Act, would they have to would they have to stop filibuster? Or can you pause it?
That kind of defeats defeats what you're trying to do. Yeah, because you've come off of it and now you're on to something else. That's the whole idea, that you have to stay on that issue and do it until there is exhaustion, literally. And the Democrats have to be there and speak and hold the floor however long they want to do it, and then you move that question.
Is it possible? Is it feasible? Is it possible at all that in your mind that the Democrats could use the rules that would be in play with the standing filibuster to filibuster all the way to the primaries? Or not the primaries, all the way to the midterms?
Again, you're talking about something that's never quite been done before. You can go back and look at the debates in the 1960s and the Civil Rights Act where they did commit, weeks on end about this. Again, it's a little hard to game that out. It's only early March, so that's a long way. But, here's the other thing about the SAVE Act. Let's say they were to pass it and President Trump were to sign it into law. Well, guess what? I can't imagine that there's not an immediate court case and an injunction somewhere, and probably something goes to the Supreme Court that says we can't put this into effect, even if this is the law of the land, this fast for this election. Because you have 50 states that under the Constitution, with some, advice, and guidance by the federal government that says it's up to, the Constitution says elections are run by time, place, and manner in all the 50 states. And Alaska says one thing, and North Dakota says something else, and then Missouri says something else. And so suddenly all these states say, we can't magically comply with this. I mean, you have to have these things worked out by probably absolutely August at the latest.
Sure.
That's not much time.
Oof. Worth a shot. That's my thought. But very, very complicated. More complicated.
And I could continue all afternoon on this if you want to hear about the standing filibuster, legislative days, the amendment tree.
We'll call you back in an hour. You have your hands full, and we're so grateful for your time here. We'll have you back, and it's going to continue to be an issue, and you're the best person to talk to about it, Chad Pergram. Thanks for the time today.
Pleasure.
Take care.
You.
Bye-bye. You could tell. He's like, can I roll my sleeves up for this one? Please do.
Absolutely, please do.
Please
because
do.
This is the stuff that the headlines don't